curiosity is a dangerous thing. It draws you in like a moth to a flame, never warning you that the light you're chasing might be the very thing that burns your world down. I was standing on my porch in the cold morning air of a quiet town in Maine. It was my 35th birthday, a day I usually spent alone, trying to forget the family I lost. But this morning was different. Right there, sitting on the weathered wood of my porch, was a plain, unmarked cardboard box. There was no return address. No courier logo. Just my name, Noah, written in a handwriting that felt hauntingly familiar, a script I hadn't seen in over 20 years. My heart skipped a beat. My father, Michael, had disappeared 2 decades ago, leaving behind a trail of debt and a broken home. Everyone said he was a coward who ran away. But as I brought the box inside, the weight of it felt like more than just cardboard and tape. It felt like the weight of 1,000 unspoken apologies. I grabbed a kitchen knife and sliced through the tape, my hands trembling with a mixture of fear and hope. Inside, cushioned by old, yellowed newspaper clippings, was a vintage brass compass and a small, silver key. But it was the item at the bottom that made my knees buckle, my mother's wedding ring. It was the very one she was wearing the night she supposedly died in a car accident, a night that haunted every dream I had ever had. I stared at the gold band, the diamond catching the dim light of my living room. I realized in that freezing moment that the package wasn't just a gift, it was a map to a truth that had been buried alive. If she had died in that wreckage, how did my father have this ring? The police said the car was a charred skeleton, that nothing was recovered. My mind began to spin. This ring was proof that my father had been at the scene before the sirens, or perhaps, he was the one who pulled her from the flames. The mystery I had lived with for half my life was suddenly staring back at me from the palm of my hand. Growing up with Michael was like walking on eggshells in a house made of glass. He was a quiet man, a watchmaker by trade, someone who understood the intricate ticking of gears but struggled to understand the messy, unpredictable emotions of a young boy. After my mother died, the ticking in our house stopped. He became a ghost, working late into the night under a single lamp, his eyes always darting toward the windows as if he were waiting for a storm that never arrived. He looked at me with a sadness so deep it felt like a physical barrier between us. Then, one night, he just vanished. No note, no goodbye, no explanation. I was 15, left with an aunt who barely knew me and a town that whispered about my father's shady dealings and cowardly escape. I grew up hating him. I hated his silence, I hated his disappearance. And most of all, I hated that I looked just like him every time I looked in the mirror. I built a life of solitude, working as an archivist, surrounding myself with the dead history of others because my own was too painful to touch. I was a man who lived in the past because the present felt like a lie. As I held the compass in my hand now, 20 years later, I noticed something strange. The needle wasn't pointing north. It was fixed, frozen toward a specific coordinate etched into the side of the brass casing with a surgical precision. I looked at the newspapers used as packing material. They weren't random. They were all articles about a local cold case from 1996, a heist at a private museum that had never been solved. My father's name wasn't in the articles, but the museum was the one where my mother had worked as a curator. The connection was undeniable, a web of secrets finally revealing its threads. The silver key felt cold against my palm, a heavy weight that demanded action. I realized that my father hadn't just left, he had been hiding in plain sight, or perhaps he had been forced into an exile I couldn't comprehend. The package on my porch was a signal, a final message from a man who had been dead to me for 20 years. I spent the next 6 hours cross-referencing the coordinates on the compass with old land surveys and geological maps. They led to an abandoned lighthouse on the jagged coast, a place locals called the Devil's Eye. It was a place where the ocean met the earth with a violent, unforgiving force, a place perfect for someone who wanted to disappear forever. The drive to the coast was a journey through my own nightmares. The rain began to fall, a cold, relentless mist that blurred the line between the sea and the sky, making the world feel as gray and uncertain as my own memories. I reached the lighthouse at dusk. It stood like a rotting tooth against the gray horizon, abandoned for decades, its white paint peeling like dead skin. I took the silver key and the compass, my heart drumming a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. The door creaked open with the silver key, a sound that seemed to echo through the very foundations of the earth. The air inside was thick with salt, dampness, and the heavy smell of old oil. I followed the compass needle. It led me not up to the light, but down, into the stone foundation, through a trapdoor hidden beneath a layer of dust and rotting floorboards. There, in a small, cramped room filled with clocks, was a sound that felt like a collective heartbeat. Hundreds of them, all ticking in perfect unison, a mechanical symphony of lost time. And in the center of the room, sitting at a workbench, was an old man with snow-white hair and hands that looked like gnarled roots. He didn't turn around. "You're late, Noah," he said, his voice a rasping whisper. It was Michael. He looked like a skeleton draped in translucent skin, but his hands were as steady as ever. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to strike him for the 20 years of silence. But the look in his eyes when he finally turned around wasn't one of guilt. It was an exhaustion so profound it seemed to pull at the very air in the room. "I didn't run away to save myself," he said, holding up a photograph of my mother. "The night of the accident, I followed her. I knew she was in danger because she had discovered a ledger, evidence of a massive land grab by the town's founding families. I saw the car go off the road. I was the one who pulled her from the wreckage, Noah. But she was already gone. I took the ring from her finger before the men who chased her could get to the car. I had to make them believe I stole the museum artifact so they would stop looking for the traitor inside their own circle. I became the thief to hide the truth." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that shook his entire frame. "I had to become a ghost so you could remain a person. If I had stayed, they would have finished what they started with your mother." The weight of his words felt like a physical blow, a pressure that squeezed the air from my lungs. All those years I spent fueling my heart with hatred, and all that time he had been living in this damp, dark hole. He had lived in a self-imposed prison to act as a decoy. He explained that the museum heist was a staged event, a cover-up he orchestrated to retrieve the documents my mother had hidden before she was run off the road. "They think the documents were destroyed in the car fire," Michael whispered, his eyes gleaming with a desperate, dying fire. "But I have them. I've spent 20 years waiting for the right moment. Waiting for you to be old enough, strong enough, to understand the complexity of the world I tried to shield you from." He opened the gold timepiece he was working on, the largest one in the room. Inside, hidden within the complex gears and springs, were microfilms. The evidence. The truth that had cost my mother her life and my father his soul. He had hidden the truth inside the machinery of time. I looked at this man, my father, and for the first time, I didn't see a stranger or a villain. I saw a martyr of the highest order. He had sacrificed every sunlit day, every birthday, every milestone of my life, just to ensure that the people who killed my mother wouldn't see me as a threat. He chose to be hated by his own son rather than see his son in a grave. The complexity of his love was staggering. A silent, enduring force that had protected me from 300 miles away. It wasn't the kind of love that hugs you, it was the kind of love that builds a fortress and stays inside the dark to hold the gate. But there was a catch, a cruel twist of fate that made the victory feel like ashes. Michael was dying. The dampness of the lighthouse and the years of chemical exposure had rotted his lungs beyond repair. I sent the package because my time is up, Noah. The gears are winding down, he coughed, clutching his chest with a hand that was now trembling. You have the evidence now. You have the ring. You have the truth. You have to take it to the authorities in the city, not the local ones, they are bought and paid for. Go to the federal level. Make her death mean something more than just a cold case file. I realized then that I wasn't just finding a father, I was losing him all over again, but this time, the grief was tempered by a respect that was almost holy. I stayed with him until the tide came in. The waves crashing against the lighthouse walls like the heartbeat of the ocean. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The ticking of the clocks filled the silence, a mechanical reminder that time is the only currency. He passed away just as the first light of dawn hit the lighthouse glass, a pale gold ray that illuminated the workbench one last time. I didn't leave him there. I called the federal authorities he told me to trust, and I handed over the microfilms. I watched from a distance as the walls of the powerful family crumbled under the weight of a truth. I went back to my porch in Maine a few weeks later. The house felt different, the air lighter, the silence no longer heavy with resentment but peaceful with understanding. I realized that the package on my porch hadn't just contained a compass and a key. It contained my identity, my history, and my redemption. I was no longer the abandoned son of a coward. I was the son of a guardian, a man whose love was so great it required him to disappear. I learned that sometimes, the people who love us the most are the ones who stay furthest away. Forgiveness isn't always a conversation or an apology. Sometimes, it's a realization that the story you told yourself to survive was only half the truth. My father, Michael, was a master of time. But he knew that some things are worth more than years. He gave up his life so I could have mine, and that is a debt I can only repay by living a life that is honest, brave, and full of light. I still have the compass. It doesn't point north, and it never will. It points to the lighthouse, a reminder that even in the darkest storm, there is a light waiting for you to find it, if you are brave enough. Life is full of packages we never expect. Some are filled with pain, and some are filled with a truth so sharp it cuts through everything you thought you knew. But the most important ones are the ones that force us to look at the people we love and see them for who they really are, flawed, desperate, and incredibly brave. My father was the villain of my childhood, but he is the hero of my life. And as I hold the ring in my palm now, I know that time doesn't heal all wounds. It just gives us the perspective to see that the wounds were actually scars of protection. The greatest secrets aren't the ones we keep from the world, but the ones we keep for the people who mean the world to us.